On the 18th of October 1985, Jack Morrison, a seasoned 2-year-old hiker, set out alone on a 5-day trek along the Appalachian Trail through Great Smoky Mountains National Park, straddling the border of Tennessee and North Carolina. A week later, he vanished without a trace. On October 28, a search and rescue team discovered a ruined campsite believed to be Jack's. His torn backpack, scattered belongings, and a camera containing photos that would change everything were all that remained. Jack's body was never found, but the evidence painted a chilling picture of his final days, stalked, hunted, and ultimately consumed by something that should not exist. Jack Morrison wasn't your average weekend warrior. An avid outdoorsman from Richmond, Virginia, he had spent more than 15 years exploring some of America's most unforgiving wilderness. A certified survival instructor, Jack had completed solo hikes along the Continental Divide Trail, sections of the Pacific Crest Trail, and multiple stretches of the Appalachian Trail. Friends described him as methodical, well-prepared, and capable of surviving in the backcountry longer than almost anyone they knew. He carried military-grade gear, knew how to find water and shelter in any conditions, and had weathered extremes that sent even veteran hikers home early. His planned October 1985 route was a familiar one, a 47-mile section from Newfound Gap to Fontana Dam, cutting through some of the wildest and most untouched terrain in the eastern United States. The Appalachian Trail through the Smokies winds across dense old-growth forests, over countless peaks above 5,000 feet, and through stretches where hikers can go days without seeing another soul. For someone with Jack's experience, this should have been a routine trip along one of his favorite stretches of trail. What Jack didn't know was that he was stepping into a wilderness, hiding something far more dangerous than black bears or sudden shifts in weather. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I witnessed during my 3 years as a backcountry ranger in Great Smoky Mountains National Park from 1983 to 1986. I was responsible for patrolling the remote sections of the Appalachian Trail, maintaining shelters and conducting search and rescue operations when hikers went missing. Accidents, injuries, and even the occasional fatality from exposure or falls weren't uncommon. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened to Jack Morrison or the cover-up that followed. Beginning in 1984 and into early 1985, we started receiving unusual reports from hikers traveling through the Smokies' more isolated stretches of the AT. These weren't the usual bear encounters or complaints about noisy campers. Experienced hikers, people who could tell the difference between a black bear and a wild boar, reported finding enormous footprints near their campsites. Some said they heard unearthly sounds at night, deep, resonant calls that didn't match any known animal in the region. They sounded almost human, but louder, stronger, more primal. Hikers often reported the unnerving sense of being followed, especially between Icewater Spring Shelter and Derrick Knob Shelter. Food caches weren't just disturbed, they were ripped open in ways that didn't match bear behavior. Containers were not only opened but twisted and crushed with incredible force. Worst of all were the deer carcasses we occasionally found, strung high in trees, sometimes 15 to 20 feet off the ground, far beyond the reach of any predator known to live there. The Park Service attributed these incidents to a recovering black bear population, larger than normal after years of protection, or to the rare but documented presence of feral hogs. The official policy was to downplay anything that might suggest an unidentified predator in the park. Bad for tourism, bad for the park's reputation. We were told to log the reports as routine activity and move on. But those of us working deep in the backcountry knew something else was going on. Jack signed in for his hike at the Sugarlands Visitor Center on the 17th of October 1985. I was working the information desk that day and spoke briefly with him about trail conditions and the forecast. He was planning a standard 5-day hike with 4 nights in the backcountry, fully equipped for winter conditions even though October temperatures were mild. When I asked about his experience, he showed me a beat-up Appalachian Trail guidebook filled with handwritten notes and maps from previous treks. It was clear this man knew exactly what he was doing. The forecast called for pleasant fall weather, daytime highs around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, nighttime lows near 50 degrees Fahrenheit, with a chance of rain on days 3 and 4. Perfect hiking conditions. Jack's itinerary had him camping at Icewater Spring Shelter the first night, Mount Collins the second, Derek Knob III, and near Molly's Ridge IV, finishing at Fontana Dam on October 22. That first night, I radioed Jack after he checked into Icewater Spring Shelter, as protocol required. He reported clear conditions, mild weather, and no issues. His voice was relaxed and upbeat, just what you'd expect from an experienced hiker enjoying a solo trip through one of America's most beautiful wilderness areas. That was the last time anyone ever heard from Jack Morrison alive. When Jack failed to arrive at Fontana Dam for his scheduled pickup on October 22, his emergency contact, his brother Michael, waited until the next morning before notifying park authorities. Hikers running a day late due to weather or trail conditions wasn't unusual, but Jack had a reputation for punctuality. In over 15 years of solo treks, he had never once missed a pickup. Search and rescue operations began on October 24. I was part of the first team assigned to follow Jack's intended route. Starting from his last confirmed location at Icewater Spring Shelter, we quickly found proof that he had indeed spent his first night there. The shelter log contained his signature, dated October 18, along with a short note. Great weather, perfect hike. Near the spring, I noticed the largest bear tracks I'd ever seen. A foul odor lingered in the air, a strange mix of rotting flesh and wet dog. Otherwise, the site seemed normal. But when we reached Mount Collins Shelter, there was no evidence Jack had spent his second night there. His name wasn't in the log, and there were no signs of camping at the designated sites nearby. This was unusual but not alarming on its own. Experienced hikers often alter their plans depending on conditions or personal preference. The section of trail between Mount Collins and Derek Knob, however, is among the most remote stretches in the park, an 11-kilometer, 7-mile route of steep climbs and descents, dense forest, and limited visibility. On October 25, our team made a discovery that has haunted me ever since. Roughly 200 yards off the main trail, near a small stream, and just before reaching Derek Knob Shelter, we found what was left of Jack's third campsite. I'd investigated dozens of bear attacks, weather-related deaths, and backcountry accidents in my career. Nothing prepared me for what I saw that day. Jack's tent, a high-quality, four-season model designed to withstand severe conditions, was shredded beyond recognition. But this wasn't the kind of tearing you see when a bear claws for food. The fabric had been ripped apart with terrifying precision, long parallel slashes suggesting claws far larger than any black bear's. The aluminum poles weren't just bent, they were twisted into spirals, as if struck by something with enormous strength. Jack's backpack was torn open and scattered in pieces across a 50-yard radius. His sleeping bag had been ripped into strips and hung from a branch 12 feet above the ground. His hard plastic food container had been crushed flat, marked with punctures and bite impressions, requiring a jaw strength beyond that of any known animal in the region. Most disturbing of all was Jack himself, or rather, the absence of him. Despite the violence at the campsite, there was no blood, no torn clothing, no signs of a struggle. It was as if he had simply vanished, while something methodically destroyed everything he owned. The forest around the campsite told its own story. Fresh gouges scarred the trees, some as high as 10 feet up, well above the reach of a bear. The ground was churned in deliberate patterns, as though something massive had circled the camp repeatedly before the attack. Then we found the tracks. In the soft earth near the stream were impressions unlike anything I had ever seen. Each was roughly 17 inches long and over 7 inches wide, with 5 distinct toes and what appeared to be extended claw marks beyond each one. The stride length measured nearly 4 feet far, longer than any human, and the gait wasn't that of a four-legged animal. Whatever made those prints walked upright, stood at least 8 feet tall, and had plowed a path of broken branches and crushed undergrowth leading uphill from the ruined camp. Finally, we found Jack's camera. It dangled from a tree branch nearly 300 yards away. The camera itself was intact, but the strap had been carefully looped over the branch. It hadn't snagged there by accident, it had been placed, almost as if someone, or something, wanted it to be found. When the film was developed, the truth became undeniable. Jack had been photographing something or someone tracking him for at least 2 days before his camp was destroyed. The first unusual photograph was taken on the morning of October 19, Jack's second day on the trail. It shows a distant view of the path ahead, with a massive dark figure partially concealed by trees, standing roughly 100 yards away. At first glance, it looks like another hiker, but a closer look reveals proportions that clearly aren't human. The figure stood nearly 8 feet tall and appeared to be covered head to toe in thick, dark hair. What made the photo especially unsettling was the creature's posture. It wasn't walking casually along the trail like a normal hiker. Instead, it was pressed against a large oak, partially hidden, as though deliberately trying to remain out of sight while watching Jack approach. Its head was turned toward the camera, and even from that distance, something about its stance was deeply wrong. Too still, too focused, like a predator studying its prey. The photographs that followed, taken throughout October 19 and 20, show the same shape at varying distances. In some, it appears ahead of Jack on the trail. In others, it moves silently through the forest, paralleling his route. The most chilling images were captured on the evening of October 19, just before sunset. Jack had apparently set up his camera on a tripod to take scenic mountain shots, but the lens captured something far darker. In the first frame, a towering figure looms 200 yards down the trail. By the third shot, it had closed the distance to about 150 yards. It was clearly the same being from earlier photos, moving closer each time. These images leave little doubt Jack was being tracked. The creature shadowed his route, keeping far enough back to avoid direct confrontation, but always close enough to follow his movements. The methodical nature of the pursuit suggested a level of intelligence far beyond any known animal in the Smokies. One especially sharp photograph taken on the evening of October 20 shows the creature standing in a clearing just 50 yards away, staring directly at the camera. Its face was part human, part something else: thick brows, a heavy jaw, and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. What struck me most about that photo was the expression. It wasn't the vacant look of an animal accidentally caught on film. There was intent in its gaze, as if it knew it was being photographed and wanted to be seen. The creature's features were shockingly clear. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, far wider than any human's. Its arms dangled past its knees, ending in massive hands that looked oversized even for its enormous frame. Its face carried a primitive cast, a heavy brow ridge, recessed forehead, and an extended jaw that suggested a brutal bite force. The second-to-last photo is the most terrifying. The creature is only about 30 yards from Jack's campsite, partially hidden behind a rhododendron thicket. The shot is sharp enough to show individual strands of hair on its coat, and in its eyes the reflection of Jack's campfire. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. On October 20, Jack had used his flash to capture an image of the thing stalking him in the dark. That meant the creature had approached his camp boldly, close enough to watch him while he was still awake and moving around. The final photograph was taken the following morning, October 21, the day of the attack. It shows enormous prints in the mud beside Jack's tent, along with a massive handprint pressed into the soft ground. The hand was easily twice the size of a man's. The fingers spread wide and sunk deep into the earth, as though the creature had steadied itself while leaning close to Jack's shelter. The implications are horrifying. The being had been close enough to touch Jack's tent while he slept inside. A later analysis of the photos revealed one more chilling detail. In several frames from October 20, particularly the tripod shots, there appeared to be additional shapes moving in the forest beyond the primary figure. While the main creature is clearly visible, careful examination suggests there may have been more than one. If true, this meant Jack hadn't been stalked by a lone predator, but by a group of these creatures working together. Jack clearly understood he was being watched, and with the practiced precision of an experienced outdoorsman, he documented the signs. The sequence of photographs told a grimly consistent story. Something had followed him for at least 3 days, closing in, studying his routines and movements until it finally struck on his 4th night in the wilderness. The final images suggest Jack knew how dire his situation was, yet he continued recording. Hidden inside a waterproof pouch among the wreckage of his gear, we found Jack's trail journal. The entries provided a chilling first-hand account of his last days, confirming everything the photographs implied. Jack knew he was being hunted. The early notes read like any of his previous journals: trail conditions, weather observations, and the usual meticulous details about wildlife sightings. But starting October 19, his tone shifted drastically. October 19, morning. Something isn't right. Found huge tracks near camp this morning. Definitely not bear. Upright, human-like, but enormous. At least 17 inches long. I've hiked these mountains for 15 years and never seen anything like it. Whatever made them circled my tent multiple times in the night. It was studying my camp while I slept. October 21, evening, last entrée. Sun's going down. I can hear them out there. Plural now, more than one. They're communicating, making sounds unlike anything I've heard. Deep guttural calls, almost language. They're working together. I think tonight is the night. I've got my knife ready, but I know it won't be enough. If anyone finds this journal, know that I wrote down everything I could. The photos are in my camera. These things are real, and they're hunting in these mountains. People need to know. The journal gave context to the photographs and confirmed the timeline. Jack was aware of the danger, but rather than abandon his gear and flee blindly through unfamiliar terrain in the dark, he chose to keep documenting, right up until the end. His final words suggested multiple creatures participated in the attack, which explained why his campsite had been destroyed so quickly and why his body had been carried off without a trace. Beyond the photos and the journal, our search team uncovered other evidence painting an even darker picture of what Jack had encountered. Within a half-mile radius of his ruined camp, we found signs of sustained, non-human activity. Fresh gouges scarred tree trunks between 6 and 12 feet high, far beyond the reach of any known animal in the region. These markings weren't random. They looked deliberate, almost like territorial signs. Some trees bore repeated scarring over multiple seasons, suggesting the area had been visited regularly by the same beings for years. Deeper in the forest, we stumbled across crude but unmistakable structures. Arranged in a rough circle about a half-mile from Jack's camp were 5 huts made from broken branches and logs. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, shaped vaguely like a teepee, but with an intentional design that couldn't be explained as a natural accident. The branches had been snapped and woven together in intricate patterns that required strength, coordination, and intelligence. Inside one of the structures, we found what appeared to be a bone cache, mostly deer, along with smaller mammals, but the arrangement was unnatural, stacked as though collected rather than scattered by scavengers. The most disturbing discovery, though, was the presence of human artifacts partially buried, scattered throughout the area. We found torn scraps of clothing, camping tools, and personal effects that clearly didn't all belong to Jack. One shredded piece of fabric looked like it had come from a hiking boot. A crushed water bottle bore the label of a brand discontinued years earlier. And then, the most chilling of all, a Virginia driver's license from 1982 belonging to a hiker reported missing in this same section of the park 3 years before Jack disappeared. The implication was unmistakable. Jack wasn't the first victim. These things had been hunting people here for years, and like predators keeping trophies, they seemed to be collecting souvenirs from their kills. That behavior didn't just suggest intelligence, it revealed a level of psychological complexity that deeply unsettled us. When our search team returned to park headquarters with Jack's camera and the evidence from his destroyed campsite, the reaction was immediate and decisive. Within hours, the photographs were confiscated by park management. A meeting was called with every member of the search effort. We were told in no uncertain terms that Jack Morrison had been killed by a bear. The official report claimed that Jack had improperly stored food inside his tent, attracting a large black bear that attacked in the night. According to the narrative, his body had been dragged off to an inaccessible location, explaining why no remains were ever recovered. All the anomalies, the unnatural claw marks, the twisted tent poles, the massive tracks were scrubbed from the official record. We were warned that discussing the case outside official channels would result in immediate termination and possible legal action. The photographs, we were told, were being sent to wildlife experts for analysis and would never be released to the public or even to Jack's family. When some of us questioned the clearly inhuman proportions visible in certain images, we were dismissed. Atmospheric distortion, camera angles, and lens warping, they said, could easily create misleading perspectives. But I know what I saw both in those photographs and at that campsite. This was no bear attack. Something else, something that shouldn't exist by ordinary zoological standards, stalked Jack Morrison for days before killing him in a violent encounter that left no trace of his body. Back at the park office, I began systematically reviewing records of missing persons in the Great Smoky Mountains over the previous 5 years. What I uncovered was a disturbing pattern obscured by bureaucracy and by the tendency to classify unexplained disappearances as accidents or hikers simply getting lost. From 1,980 to 1,985, 17 hikers vanished under circumstances eerily similar to Jack's. Every one of them was an experienced solo hiker. Everyone disappeared within the same general section of the Appalachian Trail, between Newfound Gap and Fontana Dam. In nearly every case, no remains were found. In the few that did turn up, they were partial, discovered far from the hiker's intended route. The official explanations varied. A fall from a cliff, though no bodies were ever recovered below. A bear attack, though no bear sign was present. Lost and drowned, though the victims were seasoned hikers familiar with the area. Equipment failure, though detailed investigations were never pursued. The most disturbing aspect was the seasonal pattern. These disappearances clustered in late fall and early winter, October through December, when fewer hikers were on the trail and when lone travelers were most vulnerable. It suggested a predator that had learned to associate that time of year with isolated, easy prey. I came to realize that Jack Morrison hadn't stumbled into a random encounter. He had walked straight into the territory of a predator that had been systematically hunting humans in this section of wilderness for years. The Park Service knew, or at least suspected, but chose to bury the truth rather than risk mass panic and the economic fallout of acknowledging an unidentified predator in one of America's most visited national parks. 3 weeks after Jack's disappearance, I discovered something far worse than the campsite evidence. While patrolling a remote section of the backcountry, I came across what I can only describe as a feeding ground proof of long-term systematic predation. It was a circular clearing, roughly 50 feet across, deliberately maintained. Small trees and undergrowth had been cleared away, creating an open space invisible from any trail, yet easily accessible to something large moving through the forest. The ground was packed hard from repeated use. Multiple paths led into the circle from different directions, worn smooth by heavy traffic over many years. Scattered throughout the clearing were the personal belongings of victims. I found fragments of hiking boots, broken backpack frames, crushed camping gear, and dozens of smaller personal items, watches, jewelry, wallets, even eyeglasses. These weren't simply discarded. They appeared to have been collected deliberately. Some of the objects had even been arranged into small piles, as if sorted according to some logic that only the creatures themselves understood. The site bore every sign of long-term, repeated use. Along the edges of the clearing, tree bark showed heavy wear marks, where something massive had rubbed against them again and again. A small stream that bordered one side of the space had been partially diverted, forming a shallow pool, clear evidence that the creatures were altering their environment for convenience. But the most unsettling discovery was this: newer constructions inside the clearing. Several wooden stakes had been driven into the ground in an exact geometric pattern, with bones carefully arranged around them in ways that suggested symbolic or ritual meaning. This wasn't just a feeding ground. It was a shrine or a temple, a gathering place where these beings consumed their prey according to some cultural tradition, reflecting an intelligence far beyond what we had imagined. The disappearance of Marcus Williams in October 1986 marked a turning point, both in the creature's behavior and in the Park Service's response to the growing crisis. Williams wasn't just another experienced hiker. He was a professional wilderness guide, deeply familiar with the Smokies, and known for his extreme caution and thorough preparation. That fall, Williams had been hired by a nature magazine to document animal behavior in the park's most remote areas. His assignment included the very section of the Appalachian Trail where Jack Morrison had vanished, a fact he was never told. Editors later told investigators they had chosen Williams precisely because of his reputation for reaching places other photographers couldn't or wouldn't go. He carried far more advanced gear than any of the previous victims. Along with professional cameras, he brought motion-triggered wildlife cameras, infrared photography equipment, and even a primitive night vision device, cutting-edge technology, in 1986. He also carried a stronger radio than most hikers and had arranged for twice-daily check-ins with his editors. When Williams failed to make his scheduled radio contact on October 2-3, search efforts were launched immediately. Unlike prior cases, his employer raised an outcry and applied pressure, forcing park officials to mount a large-scale operation. Within 24 hours, search teams were combing every trail and known campsite within a 10-mile radius of his last reported location. We found his camp on the second day. The scene was very different from the others. Williams had been prepared. His camp was set in a defensible position. His gear was arranged for quick escape. It was clear he anticipated trouble. His tent showed signs of hurried packing, as though he'd been about to leave when the attack came. But most importantly, Williams had managed to deploy his motion-triggered cameras before the assault. We found 4 devices strapped to trees around his camp, all loaded with film. What they captured completely changed our understanding of what we were facing. The images documented the attack from multiple angles. They revealed that Williams had confronted not one creature, but at least 5 working together with chilling coordination, like a military unit executing a planned maneuver. They surrounded the camp from multiple directions, cutting off every escape route before moving in for the final assault. These creatures had learned from past encounters. Unlike with Morrison, they approached cautiously, searching for cameras and recording equipment as though they knew what to look for. The final images were blurred by violent motion, but they clearly showed Williams being overwhelmed by multiple attackers. He fought hard, but he never stood a chance. The Williams case marked the beginning of something larger, a deliberate, organized cover-up that extended far beyond the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. Within hours of the motion camera film being developed, federal agents arrived at park headquarters and seized control of the investigation. They weren't ordinary FBI personnel, nor were they from Fish and Wildlife. They came from an agency I had never even heard of, carrying credentials that identified them only as the Special Investigations Division of the Department of the Interior. Every piece of physical evidence from the Williams case was seized: motion-triggered cameras, photographs, even our written reports of what we had found. We were ordered to sign new non-disclosure agreements, far stricter than anything we had ever been required to sign before. The penalties for talking about the incident were severe, not just termination, but possible federal prosecution under national security statutes. The official story released to Williams's employers, and the press claimed he had died in a tragic accident while attempting to photograph a bear. His body, they said, had been recovered and returned to his family for burial, though of course, no such remains were ever found. When the magazine editors pressed for more details, they were told the photographs were too disturbing to release, and that further investigation might interfere with ongoing wildlife management efforts in the park. But the cover-up was not just about suppressing evidence. Through contacts in other national parks, I learned that similar incidents had been occurring all along the Appalachian Range for decades. Rangers in Shenandoah National Park, the Monongahela National Forest, and even remote stretches of the Blue Ridge Parkway had all reported encounters matching the same description. And in every case, the evidence was confiscated. The official explanations were always the same: bear attacks, accidents, or hikers lost in the backcountry. It became clear there was a coordinated federal effort to conceal any proof of these beings. Scientists who tried to study the evidence were reassigned or lost funding. Journalists who investigated disappearances suddenly found their sources drying up and their editors losing interest in the story. Even victims' families were pressured into silence, some through official threats, others through financial settlements tied to strict non-disclosure agreements. The scale of the cover-up suggested one undeniable truth. The federal government had known about these creatures for years, perhaps decades, and had deliberately chosen to keep their existence secret. The economic consequences of admitting that unknown predators hunted in America's most visited national parks would be catastrophic, not just for tourism, but for the entire outdoor recreation industry worth billions each year. What troubled me most was the possibility that the government wasn't merely hiding the truth, but actively studying these creatures. The advanced equipment carried by the federal agents, their detailed knowledge of what to look for at the Williams site, their obvious familiarity with the creature's behavior all pointed to prior encounters. I began to suspect that we rangers were being used as unwitting data collectors. Our reports, photographs, and first-hand observations were being funneled into a classified research program, treating both the creatures and their human victims as study subjects rather than an unfolding crisis that demanded action. Weeks after Marcus Williams vanished and the motion camera photographs were seized, I was abruptly reassigned to another section of the park far from the Appalachian Trail corridor. When I tried to raise questions with my superiors, I was bluntly told that my overactive imagination was becoming a liability. The official report on Williams stated that he had likely fallen from a cliff. Never mind that his destroyed campsite was in a valley, nowhere near a sheer drop. Never mind that his motion cameras had recorded the attack from multiple angles. The photographs were seized, and so I was later told, lost during processing. It was clear to me that the Park Service never intended to acknowledge the real cause of death for hikers in the Smokies. The economic impact of admitting that an unidentified predator, something resembling Sasquatch, was actively hunting humans in one of America's most famous parks would have been devastating. Tourism brought millions to the local economy each year. The truth would have destroyed it overnight. I resigned from the National Park Service in March 1987 and moved to Colorado, where I worked for the U.S. Forest Service until retirement. But I have never forgotten what I witnessed in those mountains or the hikers who died, because the truth was considered too dangerous to admit. Even after leaving the Park Service, I kept track of missing persons reports from the Great Smoky Mountains. The pattern continued, just as I expected. Every year, usually in late fall or early winter, one or two experienced hikers would vanish without a trace from the same stretch of the Appalachian Trail. The official explanations never changed. Bear attacks, falls, getting lost, equipment failures, and bodies were rarely, if ever, recovered. Investigations were cursory at best. Press coverage, when it happened at all, focused on the dangers of solo hiking and the need for preparation, never on why so many skilled outdoorsmen disappeared from the same small section of trail. What frustrates me most is knowing these deaths could have been prevented. A simple warning to hikers about the presence of an unidentified predator in that area might have saved lives. Even without telling the full truth, the park could have temporarily closed the trail or required hikers to travel in groups through the most dangerous sections. Instead, they chose to sacrifice human lives to protect the park's reputation and preserve tourist revenue. Despite the official cover-ups, physical evidence of the creature's presence in the Smokies continues to accumulate. Every year, hikers report massive tracks, disturbed campsites, and encounters with something that doesn't match any known wildlife in the region. Most dismiss these experiences as imagination or simple encounters with bears, but a few recognize they've come face to face with something extraordinary. The creature has adapted. Recent disappearances show more sophistication, less physical evidence left behind, bodies carried completely out of the area, camps destroyed in ways that mimic ordinary accidents. But the core pattern remains unchanged. Experienced solo hikers vanish without a trace from the same section of the Appalachian Trail. I believe the being that killed Jack Morrison and at least 16 other hikers I can name is still out there in the Smokies. It has learned caution, chosen its prey more carefully, and become more thorough in eliminating evidence. But it has never stopped hunting. The truth about what happened to Jack Morrison in October 1985 died with him in that remote clearing, swallowed by something science refuses to acknowledge and bureaucracy refuses to confront. He was a careful, intelligent, highly skilled outdoorsman who did everything right, but none of it was enough against a predator that shouldn't exist. If you're planning to hike the Appalachian Trail through Great Smoky Mountains National Park, especially the stretch between Newfound Gap and Fontana, damn heed these words carefully. Hike in groups of 3 or more. Avoid camping in remote, isolated sites. If you see massive tracks, hear strange sounds, or feel like you're being followed, leave immediately. The Park Service will tell you that the greatest dangers in the Smokies are black bears, sudden weather shifts, and getting lost. They're lying. The greatest danger is the one they refuse to admit, the thing that has hunted humans in those mountains for decades. While officials look the other way, Jack Morrison, an accomplished hiker who knew those mountains better than most rangers, documented his stalker, followed safety protocols, and carried all the gear he should have needed to survive. None of it mattered when he came face to face with something stronger, smarter, and far more ruthless than anything believed to exist in the eastern United States. His camera survived. His photographs remain locked away in government archives, too dangerous, they say, for the public to see. But the creature that killed him is still out there, still hunting, still feeding on solo hikers who dare venture into the backcountry of America's most famous national park. The Park Service knows They've always known. They've simply decided that your life isn't worth as much as their tourism revenue. Don't hike alone in the Smokies. Don't trust the official safety guidelines. And don't assume that just because something isn't supposed to exist, it can't kill you. Jack Morrison made that assumption in October 1985. His remains are still somewhere in those mountains, scattered across a hidden clearing. The Park Service has worked tirelessly to keep secret. He deserved better than to become prey for a predator that officially doesn't exist. We all do.